Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar brought to you in partnership with ICS Learn. My name is Edward Craig and I'm Head of Content Labs for People Management Insight. If you're a business with a payroll of more than £3 million, you've been paying 0.5% of your annual payroll into your levy pot since it was introduced in 2017. The money you have paid expires 24 months after it enters your digital account, unless you spend it on apprenticeship training. If you don't use it, you will lose it. One of the main reasons organisations have not spent the apprenticeship levy has been the worry managers have regarding the 20% of time they lose a staff member to training. Yet training is a core requirement of all apprenticeship programmes. But the 20% rule doesn't have to mean losing your apprentice for a certain amount of hours per week. Rather, it means they get time set aside every week to develop. And if you make sure they spend that time wisely, it will benefit your business in the long term. This webinar, in partnership with ICS Learn, will provide some top tips and guidance on how to make the apprenticeship levy work for you. So, first up, I'd like to introduce our expert speakers. Joining us today is Stephen Norris. Stephen, could you tell everyone a little bit about yourself, please?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this nice sunny day. My role in ICS Learn is focused upon working with companies to support them on the delivery of flexible online programs that provide professional qualifications through the apprenticeship levy. It's great to have this session because I meet with a lot of companies, but I think it's good to connect with wider groups to discuss, what matters to companies in this somewhat fluid and relatively new world of the apprenticeships and the apprenticeship levy. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Stephen. We've also got Mark Dawe. Mark, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, morning everyone. My name's Mark Dawe. I'm Chief Exec of the Association of Employment and Learning Providers. We're basically a trade body for training providers. The vast majority are independent training providers, but we also have colleges, universities and endpoint assessment organisations as part of our membership. At the moment, we focus on work-based training, but at the moment it feels like apprenticeships are us. All the changes in policy and everything, we're helping inform our members and getting more and more engaged with employers as well as an organisation. So hopefully today we can run through some of the key points, but I'm also very interested to hear what the impacts on the ground is and what questions are coming through on the back of what we say.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mark. So over the next hour, we'll hear presentations from both Stephen and Mark, and then we'll hear from you, the audience, to wrap up the session. We'll have 10 minutes or so for questions. So if you can post questions in the box below, that'd be great. You can post at any time. No need to wait till the end. And we'll get through as many as we can. We've also got a few polls to get through, which will pop up on your screen as we go along. So do please get involved. And to kick off, I'd like to ask you the first of our 3 poll questions, which you can see on the video screen now. You'll have around 10 minutes to respond, or through Mark's presentation, in fact, and then we'll share the results and discuss them afterwards. So this is the first poll. Do you currently have an apprenticeships strategy in place? No, yes, but we'd like to know more. Not yet, but we're thinking about implementing one. So it'll be a good opportunity to see where you're all at as an audience with the apprenticeship schemes. Do please fill in your answers now, and without any further delay, it's time to hand over to Mark for his presentation. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much, and again, morning everyone. These presentations I can either take 10 minutes or a whole day, so I'm going to try and get it into 15-20 minutes, but obviously very happy to answer questions on specifics as we go through. And just to give a bit of context, AELP's priorities, as I said, we're primarily work-based learning and community-based learning, as opposed, I suppose, to classroom-based, which you'd see more in a college and university environment. And apprenticeships are at the top of our agenda at the moment, but traineeships are a very important step through into apprenticeships. Adult education budgets, for those of you who might know that with the new mayors and the combined authorities, a lot of that's being devolved and is being procured in the individual mayor areas, so that's changing. Functional skills, important for English and maths, national retraining scheme, a lot of noise out of government about wanting to help employers retrain staff so they can shift in roles, so they're not in sort of dead-end jobs or jobs that will be sort of terminated because of digital or something like that. So helping employers help those employees shift. ESF, European Social Fund funding, rehabilitation of offenders, and T-levels, less so T-levels because they're much more classroom based, I suppose, but getting involved in the employer engagement. So a lot going on in the skills world. Apprenticeships dominate at the moment, rightly so, I think. There's a spending review coming up as well, so there's a lot of noise about how things are going to change, everything else. So some of the things we talk about today, if changes are needed, then it's our chance to put in bids, in a sense, and say this needs to change, this is what we need to do. You'll see a lot of press around apprenticeship figures, the 3 million target, which not a chance that 3 million target is going to be hit now. I think everyone's accepted that, and the government uses the phrase quality around quantity all the time. But the stats here, so this shows the January starts, for example, the red line dropping from 20,000 to 9,000 at the level 2 starts. So that's the intermediate. The level 3, the advanced 16, dropped to 11 in 2018 January and back up to 13. And you'll see the higher level, the black line, rising and rising. I mean, higher and degree apprenticeships are rising all the time, partly because they started from virtually zero, and they didn't really exist before. We had level 2 and 3 and a little bit above, but the whole policy has brought in level 4, 5, 6 and 7 and 8 coming through. It's part of the discussion many of us have on an ongoing basis is what's the focus of apprenticeships. And you'll see, if I get my arrows right, here the actual year to date, and again there's your drop in numbers, big drop 17-18, pulling back up again 18-19. The intermediates, the level 2s, is where one of our big concerns are. And just to again put it in words, the drop in starts is covered there. The level 2s, a drop of 53% since 2017. And we're not obsessed about level 2s. We think actually degree apprenticeships are phenomenal. I think in the future we might be hearing people say, unfortunately, I didn't get my place on a degree apprenticeship, so I've had to go to university instead. Some amazing opportunities, and when you hear the apprentices and the employers talking about those higher level apprenticeships, the difference it makes learning and applying and earning is fantastic. So really good shift there, but we mustn't forget those first steps, those lower levels. The first step on the rung, and for many individuals, young people coming out of schools, 40% of young people coming out of schools do not have a full level 2, which is sort of GCSE level. So we have to make sure there's a starting point, and that's why there's a concern here. There's a concern around level 2 because certain sectors in particular are getting hit, like the care and hospitality, where level 2 is really important. So one of our big areas is concern around this, around SMEs, so non-levy payers not getting the same access as levy payers, and young people. So now you hear a lot about people saying, oh, the levy's not spent, I haven't spent any of my levy, I've only spent 20%, or a range of things like that. What is not well understood is the levy funds everything. So the levy not only funds the levy payers' activity, it also funds all the non-levy activity. And any excess a levy payer draws down over and above their levy, other levy payers are paying for that as well. So yes, we've got 2.5 billion. It went up from 1.5 billion in terms of budget. The cost of apprenticeships, the average cost of apprenticeships has gone up something like from £4,000 to £9,000, partly because the higher level apprenticeships cost more, partly because with the focus on more training and in particular endpoint assessment, which is a much more costly way of assessing, the cost of your average apprenticeships going up something 40-50% as well. So that's why more money is being used up per apprenticeship. But the government have basically assumed that only about 50% of the levy money will be spent by levy payers, so it can allocate the rest to the non-levy. And also, when the levy came in, there were many individuals already on apprenticeships, and the budget for that year, the first year and the second year to some extent, had to cover the carry through of those apprentices. So actually, a large proportion of the levy is being spent, and the predictions are that across the whole system, the whole levy will be spent next year. So I mean, that's a very good news story in the sense that the money is being spent, but a challenge now that either we need to find more money, or choices will have to be taken on what apprenticeships will be funded and what apprenticeships won't be funded. So a few particulars, because we know there's some issues, particularly for employers, and it's already been mentioned, the off-the-job training. And Stephen's going to go into a bit more detail on this. But it's there's a couple of pieces of guidance, and I think what I say to many people is that initially it sounds like a day a week out of the employer's premises in some classroom somewhere. It's not like that, and we produce some guidance, as have the department, around the range of things that can be included in off-the-job training. So first of all, it can be in employer's premises, and we often describe it as non-productive time, so where they're not actually doing the job that's sort of they're meant to be doing, creating value in a sense. So if you've got someone in a bar, and then you're taking them down to show them how to change the barrels in the cellar or whatever, that can be counted as the off-the-job training. If you've got the supervisor sitting down running through, this is what you'll be doing, this is how you'll be doing it, and then afterwards reviewing, well, how did that go, how's the week gone, all of that, those hours count as off-the-job training. And I reckon probably half the 20% can be counted for through that process. And I'm sure Stephen will give you a range of ideas on what's included in that. So it is 20%. We have there is a strange thing that it's calculated on actual worked hours. So someone that is in a full-time job doing 35 hours a week has to have 7 hours off the job. Someone else can be in exactly the same job and happen to be working for 48 hours a week. They have to do further off-the-job training. What's that? 8.6 hours. Even though they're doing the exact same job, the exact same standard, they're just working harder. They actually have to do more hours. So there's some craziness about it that we're trying to change, and we don't like. I mean, our organisation absolutely accepts training. We think the on-the-job is far more important, actually, because when you talk to people about what is it that makes an apprenticeship, it is that on-the-job training, that applying of the learning. Yes, you need some learning, but actually, particularly in the service sector, it's learning while you're doing. Talk to the NHS, and there's talk about someone drawing blood. Yes, you can do it, sort of practice in a lab somewhere, but there's nothing like going around sticking a needle in patients every day to learn whether you're filleting fish in a restaurant rather than in a classroom. These are all the things that are actually defined. One is on the job, one is off the job, but actually it's the on the job that's really powerful. So we're pushing very hard on that, but at the moment government are insistent that the 20% off the job is a quality measure. Actually, Ofsted, our regulator, would say actually it's all the training. They don't really care how it's done as long as it's good training, and at the end the apprentice achieves and does what was planned. So it's a controversial area. It's one we're pushing quite hard, but at the moment the rules are the rules, but it's important to see that those rules can be applied in a very flexible way, and that's the power of our training providers, is to be able to come in, sit down with an employer and describe all the different ways, and you'll hear more of that later, as I said. The other one that's come in recently, which is important to understand, is recognizing prior learning. So when you assess an individual under normal sort of apprenticeship rules, if they were 50% competent in the job already and done the training, really they shouldn't be on that level of apprenticeship because they've already done a lot of it already. You would expect an Ofsted in particular, the quality control there, would expect you to say, actually, you're too competent, you probably need to do a level higher. But as many of us know, 50%, let's say, is not enough to just jump straight through to the next level. So what the government is saying is, if you can assess and say, actually, we can do this in half the amount of time, we'll draw down half the amount of money. It may not be so linear, and still get the person through their endpoint assessment, then that is something that should be done. The big caveat is you're not allowed to drop under 12 months. That's the minimum duration of an apprenticeship. So if you're on a 3-year degree apprenticeship program, absolutely fine to drop it down to 18 months, halve the funding, halve the time that they're training and all of that, because they've done it all before. But you've got to be very clear what training they have, what they haven't, what experience they have, what they haven't. The problem is, if you're on a 1-year level 2 care program, you can't do this because the minimum duration's a year. So again, you know, good rule needs to be applied across the board, but as things stand at the moment, you can't drop below the 1 year. But it's an important thing to understand because it might allow you, particularly looking at existing workers, to say, actually, we don't want them out sort of doing their apprenticeship for 3 years, but we think they can get through it in 18 months given the prior learning. So it's accrediting the prior learning. So another important aspect for employers to consider with their training providers. And you just got to be clear that just because they've done something or done a bit of training, it may have been forgotten or it may have not been applied properly. So not everything they've done may be relevant. And that's why in apprenticeships, initial assessment of the learner is vital. That is where you're looking at their knowledge, skills and behaviour. Do they against really the knowledge, skills and behaviour of the standard? Where are they competent? Where are they not? What's the training program that's going to be in place? What's the employer going to do on the job? What's the training provider going to do on the job? The mentoring and the training, the off the job and all of that. That's where the plan is done. And if you get the initial assessment and that plan right, everything else flows from it. And both the ESFA, who are basically the funding regulator, and the IFA, not the IFA, Ofsted, the quality regulator, that makes them very happy when they see a good initial assessment and a good plan. So I thought I'd spend sort of 5 minutes or so just going through sort of where our lobby is at the moment, what we're pushing, because I mean my role is very much trying to get things changed where it's just not running smoothly. I'm quite busy because of that, and I want to again put this in the context that actually we think the policy is great. We think apprenticeship should be core for the skills training of both new recruits and the existing workforce at all levels, level 2 to level 7. So that's GCSE level through to sort of post-grad level 7, 8, in all sectors. And to make that work, I mean, everyone I'm sure listening today knows that every sector, every level, every job, every occupation is very different. They have different demands, different ways of working. And some of what we push for is more flexibility. But the reality is the government are petrified. As soon as they put flexibility in, someone will abuse it. And it's that balance we have to find between having rules to make sure that things are followed properly, making sure the regulators are looking at the right thing to ensure there isn't any abuse, and giving the individual and the employer what they need. So the standards, by July 2020, all the apprenticeship frameworks are going to be turned off, apparently. So all standards need to be in place, and the standards process, any of you who've been involved in it, has been incredibly painful. The IFA have not helped in any way, and blocked and changed and caused all sorts of issues. So there is something about getting that standards process properly in place, listening to employers, and making sure all of those standards are in place and they're fit for purpose with the right form of assessment. Provision, this is at the moment, Ofsted review, quality review levels 2 to 5, and the Office for Students levels 6 and 7. And we think there should be a more common approach, and particularly the focus on the on-the-job training. As I said, the off-the-job measure is not a great measure for quality. It's important, but it's not a great measure for quality. It's what happens in the workplace. Making sure assessments fit for purpose, and there's a bit of detail there. The quality mechanisms we don't think are in place yet, so we're lobbying hard around that. Funding bands, a real controversial area. Firstly, when a standard's set up, the actual funding band is allocated, and often at a level which employers are saying, how on earth can this be the funding you're giving us to do what's necessary? And I think, and then we've got funding band reviews going on where in some cases funding bands are being cut, and it's causing a lot of uncertainty and destabilization. And we're pushing really hard with the IFA to say, look, we just need clarity. We need everyone sitting around the table, the providers, the assessment organizations, the employers, the officials, to define what is the apprenticeship. They talk about quality, but they say they don't want it gold-plated. So what is it they're actually looking for? And therefore, what is the cost of delivering it? And if we all can agree that, then it'd be a lot easier. And the adult care worker has just come in confirmed at £3,000, and our providers are saying it's just not viable. We just cannot deliver a good quality programme at £3,000 for a level 2 adult care worker. Halfords have just pulled out in level 2. We've had all the controversy around project manager. Now they're very specifics. There's a lot of good stuff, a lot of good well-funded standards, but it just shows you that when you see the noise in the press, some of the uncertainty, there are certain things that need sorting out to make this run smoothly and be sustainable. And it'd be a real shame if it was undermined by some of these issues. I've talked about the levy and how it's being used. We think it's going to run out next year from all the noises that government are making. And I genuinely think that a vast proportion of university students will start saying, 50% of university students don't get into a graduate job. Why are we going to university with £50,000 worth of debt? I'd much prefer to go into work and do an apprenticeship. Many employers, many sectors are saying, at last, finally, I can have the individual at 18 and train them on the current equipment, the current ways of doing things in the way we do things, and they still get a degree from the university. So we actually think that the 15 billion that's spent on HE at the moment would be better made open to all HE, whether it's set in a university or in the employer's workplace. This universities still get the same amount of money. It's just a different setting. So that's part of what we're looking at for the future. And then there's a whole range of things around where there are challenges. Non-levy employers, the amount that's being allocated to them, actually the starts will drop next year. And it's just been announced today that the government will start transitioning non-levy employers onto the apprenticeship system that levy employers use. Firstly, we know that it's quite a hard system to use, and when someone's only got 1 or 2 apprentices, the training providers need to be there holding their hand. But secondly, it will present a challenge because it's not an unlimited budget, and somehow the government's going to have to put some controls in. So there'll be yet a further transition of what's going on. I've talked about the level 2s and the challenges there. We need something to help support the level 2 provision, because if it's not done through apprenticeships, it'll have to be done somewhere. Young people, more of an incentive to have young people involved in apprenticeships. At the moment, again, there's a drift towards the existing worker, the older worker. Again, nothing wrong with that in terms of training, but we must make sure we're not blocking opportunities for young people. Schools are meant to be the legal requirements of letting providers talk about skills. We're not seeing that across the board, so we need more of that. Our big push is actually the best way to encourage people into apprenticeships and skills is to take an apprentice into the school, especially if they were sitting there a few years earlier. And one great story I heard, I think it was a BAE apprentice, and he just finished 3 years. He was on £35,000 with his own car, walks into the school and said, look, 4 years ago, I was sitting where you are. Look at me now. And that was it. They're all off to BAE. English and maths functional skills, there's an issue around funding there, so that's more our issue. And accrediting prior learning, I've just talked about in terms of, yes, that's a great idea. It can shorten the apprenticeship, but if that's going to happen, we need to lose the minimum duration. Need safeguards in place so people don't abuse it, but it seems like a good idea going forward for all apprenticeships. Some stuff around the funding. I'm not going to go into vast amounts of detail other than to say that in the Public Accounts Committee, basically the department's saying either we need more money from somewhere, maybe they'll start levying all employers, or we're going to have to make hard decisions. So that's the next phase. That's the next phase of the spending review. So watch out for that. And finally, if you're interested, we have our national conference on the 24th and 25th at the Park Plaza, Westminster. Just log on to our website and you'll find details there. And you've got 2 days of talking apprenticeships and other skills. So if this hasn't been enough, plenty of opportunities to hear me and others on those 2 days. So that's me done, cantering through. I am now going to hand over to Stephen, and I have to do a little technical thing while I'm speaking. So hopefully,
before Stephen gets going, we've got the poll results. But Mark, thank you very much for that presentation. That was absolutely fantastic and interesting. It seems like there's a battle between the nuance of reality and the kind of box ticking demands of central government. Is that sort of fair assessment?
Yeah, and I think like all these, I mean, they've changed everything. They've changed the curriculum, the assessment, the funding, everything. And when anyone will know, when you change everything, you're going to have lots of problems to deal with. And that's really what we're all working through at the moment.
Yes, absolutely. I can see it. I'm not surprised. It's a very busy time for you at the moment. So one operational question has come in. Will the slides be available? Jill has asked, will the slides be available for us following the webinar? Absolutely. And Mark's slides were stuffed full of interesting bullet points and information, which he quite wisely just didn't read out. So you can get them afterwards on demand and pour your way through those and get the insights again, with Mark's commentary flowing in the background as well. So with poll results, do you currently have an apprenticeship strategy in place? And we have over half of our readers, listeners even, are saying yes, but we would like to know more. That's 53%. Does that sound representative, Mark, to you, in your experience?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if we'd asked this the year before, it would be nowhere near that. And I think there's a range of things going on. This is only 15% of levy payers were actually had apprentices, and now it's something like 75, 80%. So it just takes time to establish, okay, we've got this tax. A lot of people see it as a tax. How can we get it back? What are we going to do? And then it just takes time to develop a strategy. Our membership, as I said, our providers are out there every day talking to employers and helping them. So obviously another chunk to get through, but I'm sure next year we'll see it move further. And that's just, again, a change of the way of doing things, and a great opportunity that's been presented to everyone.
Yes, I think that sort of cultural shift is actually represented in the poll, because where we have 53% of people saying yes, we would like to know more, we have 16% just saying no, and 31%. So that's what the remainder, 47%, say not yet, but we're thinking about implementing one. So sort of that seems to sort of be in line with what you were suggesting. We've also had a question in, which let's see if I can put it to you, Mark, from Alex. Are there initiatives around apprenticeship schemes which help bring the communities together to emulate some of the broader learning benefits of being at a university, sport and interest clubs, so all apprentices can be brought together socially and that sort of thing? Have you come across that?
Yeah, there's been quite a lot of discussion around that. So a couple of angles. One is the NUS, National Union of Students, is actually looking to create, well, they have an apprenticeship membership, but then it's how they can bring those communities together region by region. We also have the Apprenticeship Ambassador Network, which is the employers, but then the Young Apprenticeship Ambassador Network, which are actual apprentices or ex-apprentices, and they're regionally focused as well. And as I said, this again is something that's shifting and changing, where people are looking at how they can bring it together. But also providers. I mean, I'm an events a Cube provider, Cube, who are a provider tonight doing their awards. But again, they look at trying to bring their apprentices together, even if it's virtually in some cases. So yes, very early days, but people are very aware that that's one of the cultural differences, in a sense, between doing an apprenticeship or being at college or university.
Yes, I can see that. It's interesting that it's something that sort of seems to be proactively, challenged, or a problem that's trying to be solved, which is sort of very encouraging. Okay, so crack on. Next poll we have, which is it up on your screen now. How much of your levy are you currently spending? All of it, some of it, none of it. So do let us know on that if you're working for an organisation that is a levy payer. But without further delay, please, I would like to welcome back in Stephen for his presentation. Stephen, over to you.
Thanks very much. It's great to hear the questions are coming in, and that I think is all good stuff for us to share and get those wider views. I want to talk about the 20% in a bit more detail, particularly in terms of flexible online models. Just to put that in context, ICS Learn have been delivering professional qualifications for many years now. For example, we've worked with CIPD for over 30 years and have over, at any one time, we have over 9,000 learners with us. And across our whole programs, our whole range of programs, we have in excess of 18,000 learners. So with the size of a large college or a small university. So when the apprenticeships came along, we were very keen to embrace those. As Mark has indicated here, that there've been a few bumps in the road. It's been a bit of a mixed start, but we do, in general, welcome the philosophy of them very much. And we can see, in a sense, in terms of the starts, that where we've had slow take up of the monies and seen a significant number of companies kind of be slow to act, that is improving, and perhaps not least because the government is now starting, as past April just gone, starting to take some of that money back on the first monthly payments are now coming back out of that. I like to think of it as your levy account as a kind of water tank with the money dripping in at the top, and for the first 2 years you had the single tap that you could open and use that to develop staff, retrain them, redirect them, take new people in, look at succession training and so on. But then after the 2 years, the government has then added their own tap and started to take some of that precious resource. So it's great that we're seeing more people engaging with the apprenticeship levy. So it's an imperfect system, I think it's reasonable to say. We've had things where, particularly in the first year, I mean, an example from our world, the learning and development CIPD programs only came online about 9 months ago, but people would have been paying their levy for over a year before they could access those courses, and that's been true across the board. But we're seeing a lot more programs coming online and a lot more choice there, which is good news. Obviously, there are companies we come across who have got their bases in England, but large numbers of staff in areas such as Scotland, Northern Ireland or Wales, and the devolved governments take a different approach to the levy system. So it can be difficult for companies to negotiate their way around those systems, so that it can be challenging. I mean, on the point of the level 2 and 5, I mean, there are the higher qualifications coming through, but I can only applaud the government for the focus on level 2 and 5, because the UK has always been, world class in delivery of higher education, and now, over the past 5 or 10 years, we're good at schools as well. You know, we're improving in the international ratings, but compared to our competition, you know, kind of countries like France, Germany, Japan, our apprenticeship and our focus on the level 2 and level 5 has been, you know, frankly appalling by comparison. And so the initiative of the apprenticeship system is great that it's focused on that area, because, you know, ultimately level 2 to level 5 represents, you know, the majority of school leavers in many cases. Many of those who leave have no idea of you know, what vocation they want, but over time they kind of mature into their workplaces and develop with the role perhaps even developing around them. And so apprenticeships now give a real opportunity for, you know, for planned training, I think. So is it better than before? Well, you know, certainly the apprenticeship system has put the training budget firmly into the boardroom. You know, we hear stories from HR directors, you know, where the CFOs being in the boardroom, you know, and the line item of apprenticeships, you know, which for some people could be, you know, 5 million, 2 million, or even £50,000, whatever it is, but they're asked about that line item and they say, oh yeah, sure, we're working on that. I'm sure we're using that well. And then after the meeting, running along to the HR director and saying, how are we spending this? Are we doing this well? Can we spend more? I think by the government's done a, you know, a good thing there by putting the budget into the boardroom. It's created something that cannot be reappropriated, certainly at this time. And that really gives, you know, HR and those in charge of training and development the opportunity to plan training. And, you know, ultimately in HR, you know, we're in sales, you know, you have a sales pipeline. Well, in HR, I guess you have a people pipeline, whether that's for succession training or whether it's because the company needs to move people around, reshift focus, keep up with, you know, changes in industry. You have that pipeline and now that budget to plan to. And I don't think it can be underestimated how important that the apprenticeships now have national qualifications. Many of them have national qualifications attached to them, because the importance to the individual when they're studying to get something that has that kind of currency and recognition rather than just an internal certificate for training is extremely motivating and important to individuals. So we see that as a very strong thing. And there will continue to be changes going forward. And from that perspective, you know, from April just gone, firms can now share up to 25% of their levy funds with their supply chain. So some companies are seeing that as a very positive thing, particularly the bigger companies where they can support their supply chain for that. So there are some good changes coming through, and not least through Mark's lobbying as well. So what about the 20%, focusing around that, what we know from those wishing to learn is that they like control over their learning. This slide rather links back to a very old advert, but the essence of it is that people like to learn in a very flexible place, whether that's any time, any place, anywhere. And here is a survey, a recent survey, which I think is a good reflection of surveys over the past and research over the past 5+ years around what learners like in terms of learning. And on the top left hand there, you can see that learning at their own pace is particularly important. I think we can all kind of subscribe to that in our busy lives, and you know, obviously online learning does deliver that. In addition, learning at the point of need, that's very much in the DNA of apprenticeships, where, you know, the focus really is applying those skills at work. Excited to use technology and willing to experiment. Well, those are very, kind of new developments in a way, where we're all so much more connected through social media, people saving their photos online, all their emails are saved online, whether it's Gmail or Outlook or whatever it is. People are now taking that for granted. So the notion of learning platforms and accessing things online is much more within people's, reach, and the technology is so good, that, whether it's an iPad or a phone, that you can access your online learning in the same way that people access TED Talks or whatever. You could be going to work and following one of our podcasts or whatever as part of your learning program. So some changes there we see as helping flexibility. And in terms of collaboration, that 91% on the center column, and manager support and mentoring, well, that it also is in the DNA of the apprenticeship system. It really is a strong part there that managers and mentors are involved. And in terms of collaboration, I mean, online learning, certainly in our world, the students belong to learning communities. So if you at 10 o'clock at night you're working on your assignment, as we all tend to leave things at the last minute, but if you're working on your assignment, then you can reach out. There are 18,000 learners out there in our world, so there's bound to be someone out there that you can ask questions and so on, and you have that collaboration as well. In terms of the challenges, well, no time, nothing changes there, I suppose. But again, flexible learning does help a lot with that. Content's an interesting one, as is the technology supporting that content, because certainly in our case, our focus isn't upon bricks and mortar. We put all our energies into the development of the materials, and they've developed over a period of time, and we certainly get feedback on those. So whether you're delivering podcasts, online lessons, live online lessons which are recorded, TED Talk type material, interactive worksheets, and so on, you need that breadth and depth to keep things interesting. That is for sure when you're learning in that way. And making that accessible, and as I say, technologies have moved a lot on that, whether it's 4G or whatever. So with that importance of flexibility, and looking at the 20%, as Mark alluded to earlier, the off-the-job training is to do with your paid hours. It's not just the training that you get when you start a job. Here's this, here's how to switch on your computer, and here's the CRM, or here's how the machine works, or whatever. It has to be specific to the apprenticeship, so that 20% has to be related to that, and the training must therefore be linked to the framework, to the standard. That is important for sure. But does it mean that you have to be away from work to get that 20%? Certainly not. It does not require time away from the workplace. I mean, some myths have grown up around the 20%. Does it mean that you have to be in a classroom? Certainly not. It does not mean that. So that is key as well. The apprentice essentially keeps a diary log of their activities, which they follow, where they're applying their knowledge, their learning within the workplace. So that is a very positive use of their time. It's an opportunity for the development of knowledge and skills and behaviors that are relevant to their role. And as I say, it's a flexible thing in the workplace. And in practical terms, what does that look like? Well, certainly in our world, typically for apprenticeships that deliver professional qualifications, the learner is assigned tutors for those qualifications. They're flexible online learning. That learning is delivered in that way. For example, our tutors are available from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. so they can be having tutorials in the evening when they're at home, cup of tea in hand or whatever. They have unlimited access to our tutors, so there's great flexibility there. And if they're given 2 months, we give indicative times for how long a unit should last. So a unit that you could probably do in 4 to 5 weeks, you're given a couple of months to do. So there's wriggle room there to work around the demands of work and home as well. But learners are also assigned a second tutor, and that tutor, their tutor assessor, is the one that comes out to see them at work, at their place of work, and work with them on their at work project, which is part of the apprenticeship. This is where they have the opportunity to apply their skills at work and, as it were, show off their learning. So our tutors come to the place of work. They have regular meetings with the candidates and with the and monthly calls as well. And the line managers or mentors are involved in that. And one of the key things is that they need to choose a project to demonstrate how they're using their learning in work. And that allows them in practical terms to show how they're applying their learning and their skills in the workplace. So the key element here is that they should choose a project that, firstly, it excites and interests the learner. Secondly, it's something that's good for the company, something they could be working on that's productive, but also allowing them to clock up their 20% and apply their learning, and also that it works for and has to fit within the apprenticeship standards, as we've said. For example, in our CIPD courses world, and someone in HR might look to review their onboarding processes, and that could be a focus of the project where if they're doing their employment law unit in CIPD, they can be reviewing welcome packs or job descriptions or whatever it is, and applying that learning while they're sitting at their desk working on their project. So there is output that is useful for the company. They're applying their learning while sitting at their desk, and they're clocking up their 20%. In the L&D world, it might be a new compliance program that they're designing. It can be anything, but whatever it is, they can be working on it. Perhaps tutoring, mentoring unit is allowing them to devise ways within their new compliance program that sharpens it up and improves it. So there's plenty of opportunities for them to clock up the 20% within the workplace. And some people will look to put an hour a day quiet at the end of the day to work on it. Other people will do it in chunks, and you can flex it to suit. And in terms of gathering evidence, we give guidance to the learners, and that could be gathering evidence for the portfolio could include minutes of meetings, the time that you're in that meeting discussing and applying your knowledge within the meeting, perhaps to discuss how you're reviewing the onboarding or something. It can be notes from the discussion. It can be drafts of work that you're developing as you're applying your learning. It could be shadowing colleagues and so on. We also provide, as part of the programs, and others do this, but we also apply across most of our programs workshops. They're not compulsory, but up to 8 workshops over the 21-month typical 21-month program. And those workshops are, in our case, we run those in regionally in places like Manchester, Birmingham, London, and it's a great opportunity for the learners to share ideas and meet with others who are in the similar job, develop their thinking, and so on. And that also adds to the 20 place. That takes me to the last slide, really. from that point of view, they log in their 20% while they're in the workplace. In addition, of course, they'll need to be committed to their own time to their studies. We typically say over a program that it's useful to put maybe 3 to 4 hours aside, and at level 5 that would seem reasonable, maybe an hour on a Tuesday evening, an hour on a Thursday evening, a couple of hours at the weekend to work on their studies. It could be that they're listening to the podcast on the train or something on the way to work, but that keeping the plate spinning from that point of view is important. So in summary, the 20% that they're logging is that time at work when they're working on their project and doing activities that are linked to the standard, and which provides real benefits to them and to the company. And it's the opportunity for the company to support the employee, within the workplace as they develop their knowledge and skills, throughout practical activity, which is good to all standard or all people. Now, I'm not sure if the slides are turning here. I've been turning them this end, so I've come to my last slide, and basically we at this point would be interested in you sending in your questions following the 2 inputs. Any further thoughts that you've got there, that would be great. And I'll hand back to Edward at this stage.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. That was a fascinating and great insight, practical insight into how to deliver those 20%, or the 20, or overcome the 20% barrier, as you called it at one point. It does sound like there's quite a sort of big communication issue with this. It's just explaining to people that it doesn't mean all those hours out of the office. There's so many ways around it. Is that fair?
Yes, I think in the original model, when the government were considering the 20% and why it is 20%, is that they did reference really back to the kind of notion of day release and employers being familiar with that. They also look worldwide, and the leading practitioners of apprenticeships, countries like Germany, Switzerland, strangely, Japan, those practitioners see 20% as a minimum, and the government really want apprenticeships to be world standard. And so what they're looking for is to emulate best world practice. But I think because of that, industry is also slightly used to the day release. Colleges obviously will promote that. I used to work in colleges, so I feel I can talk about them. But that certain myths therefore have grown around that, it needs to be in a class, it needs to be, outside of the work, which are absolutely false. It is a communication issue, and strengthening that message would be to the good, really.
Absolutely. So we've quickly poll action we've got to get onto. So how much of your apprenticeship levy are you currently spending? And the results of our poll is almost a resounding sum of it from everybody, which is 77%, which I guess isn't desperately surprising, is it, Stephen, that 3/4 of people are spending some of their levy and only 7% spending all of it?
I think, as Mark said earlier, it's encouraging that so many people are now on board compared to last year. In terms of the 7% spending all, yes, we come across very few companies that are in that position, and that's a good reflection, I think, of that. Some companies have been nervous about going up to the end spend, feeling that they'll run out of money, slightly forgetting that even if you overspend, if you say, for example, do a £9,000 program and you've spent all your money and you want someone to go on that £9,000 program, firstly, the money is only drawn out on a monthly basis, so it's not like a whole chunk at once, and of course your levy's being topped up all the time. But also, if you overspend, you actually only are charged by the government 10% of the cost. So a £9,000 would only cost £900 out of your own budget. So sometimes it's a fear of not going over budget that's slowing people down, and sometimes I think of a lot of it is to do with just people gaining inertia after the slow first year, where people were getting used to the idea and starting to put strategies in place.
Great. So our final poll, which you're going to have only a few minutes to fill in, is: do you now feel you fully understand how the apprenticeship levy works? Yes, no, enough to get by. So if you can rattle through that whilst we do a couple of questions which have come in. Starting off, Mark, let's bring you back in. Katerina has asked, is it the priority requirement for apprentice to work 30 hours per week?
Okay, absolutely not. So first of all, actually, the 10% contribution has just been reduced to 5%. So it's even less that the employer has to pay if they're a non-levy payer or a levy payer. And don't forget, it's first in, first out. So if you've got spare levy from the last 2 years, that gets used up first. So there's a pretty good deal at the moment. And I've got 4 apprentices in a team of 30 staff. I've told all my senior team if they want to do an MBA, now's the time to do it. So going back to the question, you can be a part-time employee. The main thing is that you are an employee. You're on a contract of employment, whether it's part-time or full-time. And if you're under 30 hours, then the big thing is that your duration of apprenticeship is extended by the proportion. So say you're doing 15 hours instead of 30 hours. 30 hours is their threshold for full-time. So if you're doing 15 hours, the apprenticeship time is doubled to make sure that they've got that on-the-job experience. So as long as they're an employee, it doesn't matter whether it's 1 hour or 50 hours, they can do an apprenticeship.
Thank you very much, and that answers Michelle's also asked the same question, so thanks a lot for the clarity on that. I've had Lorraine from Oxford has asked, if someone is already studying for an accounts qualification, for example, can the levy be tapped into retrospectively, bearing in mind prior accredited learning and at least 12 months to go, Mark?
Good question, and it's these ones that you sit down with your training provider and talk through. So technically, I can't see any reason why they can't flip over to an apprenticeship with the adjustment. Now it's slight, we're starting to step into a grey area here because you're basically stopping them on one program and starting them on another. But it fits the prior learning approach. The apprenticeship means, if they're doing AAT, for example, the apprenticeship is the AAT qualification and a range of stuff around it. So they will have to be doing more. But absolutely, I think that's valid as an approach. Stephen might have a view on that.
Yes, I think, as you say, it's a conversation with the provider because it depends how far you are into your program, how much is left to run, and if you're over 50% across, it might not be worth it. If you're 10% or 20% into the program, it might be worth considering. But it will depend on the program, the value of the program, and how much work you have under your belt to date. We've definitely done that, but it does tend to be for those that aren't very far into their studies.
Thank you very much. Darren has asked, it's not a million miles away from the same question, but Darren from Defence Primary Healthcare has asked, if someone you're looking to recruit already holds a number of level 5 to 7 qualifications or an MBA, can they still enter into a higher level apprenticeship if they are looking to change careers? Stephen,
yeah.
Or Mark, if you want to go.
Well, no, absolutely. As 100%. The rules changed, actually. So not only can they do another degree, they could drop down to a level 2. So say they wanted to start plumbing and they'd done a post-grad in classics, absolutely, they can start at level 2 plumbing.
Great. Quite a shift. The classics plumbers.
Yeah.
We need more of those. Irene has asked, we are considering using our levy based on current funding bands. With today's introduction to the scheme of non-levy pairs, will this potentially reduce those funding bands?
Do you want me to go again?
Yes, Mark. Sorry, I think it's you again.
Yes, please, Mark.
So the funding bands, there is a value for money pressure on them, but what we've said all along is the funding band must be the cost of delivery. All right, so what do we want delivered in an apprenticeship? How much is it going to cost? The big question is how much will the government then allow either the levy or government subsidy to support? So at the moment, we've talked about 100% for levy payers, 95% for SMEs. That's where these difficult conversations are going to go on. So they might say, actually, we'll only support 50% of the cost of a level 7 and 100% of a level 2. They might say we need more women in STEM in the northeast, so we're 100% fund that. Given the apprenticeship system now, they can actually play around sort of standard by standard. So there's no certainty whatsoever, but just going back to the point, the cost of delivery is the cost of delivery and assessment. You can't change that. It's really how much money is available. And it's a good question, and one that we're sort of talking to the government about. What system are you going to put in place to control demand and control the budget that you're using?
Well, thank you very much. And I think on a kind of a tricky question about the workings of the actual levy, I think it's good to round off the session with looking at our final poll, which may actually have changed after that final question. If people were to revote, do you now feel you fully understand how the apprenticeship levy works? And 54%, at least half of them, have saying enough to get by, and 32% say yes. So, Stephen and Mark, I feel you, at least on this webinar, you've done your job in helping people get to grips with it. And unfortunately, that is all we've got time for today. But I hope you have found the session useful. I certainly have. Huge thank you to both our speakers, Stephen and Mark, for taking part and sharing your brilliant expertise. And sorry for all the questions we couldn't get to, or answers we couldn't find. But I would like to thank you for listening and for taking part. Also, like to thank our sponsors, ICS Learn, for partnering with us. So from me, Edward Craig, it's a thank you, and do enjoy the rest of your day.